help. It's the same, a little bit of money. So it was a little bit confusing, but it really is pretty simple. And that is as follows. We know there's a rule, and it was mentioned in the very first Mishnah of the Masechta. The rule is that if someone is married to an erva, if an erva falls to Yibum, so let's pick a simple case. Shimon is married to Reuben's daughter. So if Shimon dies, Reuben cannot do Yibum on his own daughter. It's an erva. So the halach is, not only would Reuben not do Yibum on his own daughter, on Shimon's almana, but if Shimon was married to another woman, Reuben wouldn't be able to Yibum on her either because she paters her tzara. That's a very basic halacha we learned in Yibum. The devil is always in the details. And the question is, under what conditions does an erva pater her tzara from Yibum, and under what conditions does the erva not pater her tzara from Yibum? So let's look at, for example, the Mishnah says that if the erva died and is no longer the wife of the nifter, then her tzara would be able to do Yibum. So in our case, if Reuben's daughter died or was divorced by Shimon, and then Shimon dies, and when Shimon dies, he only has one wife, who's the outsider. On that woman, Reuben can do Yibum. That's what the Mishnah says. And there's two questions. There are two questions that are linked to each other that we have to clarify about that halacha. Question number one: when we say that if the erva died or was divorced, the tsar could do Yibum, what does that mean? Does that mean if they never were married to Shimon at the same time? So, for instance, Shimon was married to Reuben's daughter, and then Reuben's daughter died, or Shimon divorced her, and after that, Shimon married a second woman, and then Shimon died, so then Reuben could do Yibum on this woman, because there was never a time where this woman was a co-wife with Reuben's daughter. That's one shot of the Gemara. And that, according to that shot of the Gemara, in the Suin, the fact that they're married together automatically puts a poison into the tzara that she could no longer fall to Yibum. That's one shot. The other shita is, no, it doesn't matter if they were both married to Shimon at the same time. That's not relevant. As long as when Shimon dies and the chiyuv to Yibum gets triggered, if at that point he's only married to the other woman, then the erva will not pater the tzara. So even if Shimon was married to Reuben's daughter and Rivka, for instance, at the same time, as long as Shimon divorced Reuben's daughter, or Reuben's daughter died before Shimon died, then when Shimon died and the chiyuv for Yibum was triggered to Reuben, there was only one woman, the other girl, Rivka, was chayiv in Yibum. So that's machlokes number one. Do you say that it's the death of the nifter? Is death triggers a chiyuv Yibum and you assess it at that time? Or no, you assess it in his lifetime if he was ever married to the erva at the same time or not. That's one machlokes. The other machlokes, which we encountered yesterday, is Zika considered like a marriage? So the question would be, is if Reuben was married to a different woman, and at some point, this erva was zakuk to him, or vice versa. If Reuben was married if Shimon is married to Reuben's daughter, and at some point another woman was zakuk to him, does that make it into tzaras erva or not? So those were the questions that we had yesterday. So it's really, really simple. What is the arrangement of when a co-wife is also and when she's not? And is Zika strong enough to create that situation of a co-wife to aser? Now we're getting into a whole new sugya, and that's the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Amud Beis. We're going to be learning today virtually what we're going to do is like learning the Shav Shmaitza, discussing Sveikas and Chazakas. So naturally, it'll be very simple and straightforward. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Uchulan shahayu behen kedushin or gerishim b'saf. Hari elu hatzaris choltois v'loy b'syabos. So let's pick a very simple case. Shimon was married to Rivka, a complete stranger, and then Shimon went and made a kedushin on Reuven's daughter, and it was a suffix kedushin. So now it's a suffix if Rivka is the tzara of the erva, meaning Reuven's daughter, or not. If it's a good kedushin, then of course Rivka doesn't do even with Reuven if Shimon dies. If it wasn't a good kedushin and she's the only wife of Shimon, then she will do even. That's one option. The other option is gerushin. What happens if Shimon was married to Rivka and to Reuven's daughter, and Shimon gives a get to Reuven's daughter? He divorces her. But the question is was it a good get or not? It's a get. So once again, we're in a situation where we do not know if this woman Rivka has a tzara who's an erva to Reuven or not. We don't know if Rivka has a co-wife that's Reuven's daughter or not. So in all these cases where it's a suffix, a gershim b'suffix, hare elu hatzaros choltos v'loy misyabos. So the tzara here, since we don't know if she's a co-wife with an erva or not, we can't let her go free because maybe she's not a co-wife and she's chayv in yibum, or maybe she is a co-wife and we can't let her do yibum. So the happy medium is choltos v'loy misyabos. That was the happy medium that Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka wanted to do between Bisham and Basil. Chalitza and Ibum solved our problems. Ketzad, Sova Kedushin. What's an example of a Sova Kedushin? Zok to Mishnah, Zarek La Kedushin. A man threw a Kedushin to a woman. So let's say it's Kesef Kedushin. He said, I read Mukadeshes Li, Bitabas Ukadash Voish of Yisrael, and he throws it at her. And the halach is, if it's in her rishus, she's going to be kind of. If it's in his rishus, he's going to be kind of. Here it's speaking where it was in Rishus HaRabbim. It was in Rishus HaRabbim, and the halacha is if if it's within Dalet Amis, the Rabbanan say that you're koina. Person is koina within Dalet Amis of himself. So what if they're exactly 8 Amis apart, and he throws the ring? Safek Karav Loi, Safek Karav Loi. Is it within her Dalet Amis, or did it land within his Dalet Amis? So then we don't know if it's a kedushin. Zeh Safek kedushin. This is a Safek kedushin. Now, if you read these words, Zehu Safek kedushin, it would lead you to believe that there might be other cases that you would mistakenly think is a Safek kedushin. I'm telling you right now, this is the only option. This is the only example of a Safek kedushin. Keep that in mind. That's going to come back a little bit later. So let's see what Rashi does. Safek karvloi. So you ches amos mitzum tzamos beineim. There was exactly 8 amos between them. Birshus harabim, and it was Birshus harabim. And we know with Dalet Almois, Koinoi Sham, anything that lands within your 4 amos, your Koina, it's a Drabanon, Vizarkoi, and he threw the Kesef Kedushin, Safek B'Dalet Amos Akar of Law, Safek B'Dalet Amos Akar of Law. Okay, so the question is, if it's only a Kinyan Derabanon, so how does this affect the Kedushin? The Machloikas Rishonim, how these Kinyanim Derabanon work. There's one Shita who holds that Hefker, Bez, and Hefker not only will take away an item from somebody and make someone lose violence through the power of Hefker, Bez, and Hefker, Bezdin is even allowed to give you something. And that's how this Hefker, Bez, and Hefker works, is Bezdin is granting this to her. And since Bezdin is granting this to her, she's kinded. That's one pshat in the Rishonim how Hefker, Bez, and Hefker works. There's another pshat in Hefker, Bez, and Hefker that it's only able to take something away from somebody. It doesn't make her be koined. So according to that sheet in the Rishonim, I believe he learned that there's a difference between Hefker and the Sina. Here, I'm not just being mafkert, I'm giving it to her. When someone's giving it to her, then she could be koined. I hope that's right. I think that's what I remember. So Zok Gemara, that is the case of Safek Kedushin. What's Safek Gerushin? Safek Gerushin, Kosav B'Chsav Yodai. He wrote her a get by hand, in his own handwriting, not with a cipher. He didn't do it professionally. He did it using YouTube. Ve'ein alav edim, and there's no edim signed on it. Or yesh alav edim, there's edim who signed his get, but ve'ein boisman. He didn't write the date on the get. The reason why it's very important to write the date on the get is very simple. What if someone's married to a woman whose family, like his niece, and she does nus? When she does nus, so she's chayv misa. But it's his niece. So he might, if he doesn't put a date on the get, he might write up a get quickly, and he'll say the get was given to her before she did this. So he'll save her. So that's why a get has to have the date. Or yesh buzman ve'ein bo ela erechad. I'm sorry. It is not. It's very good, very good. I'm happy. So Moti asking a gavaltic kasha. So this gets puzzled. So why is it a suffix? So that's a very good point. We'll see Rashi. Or if yesh b'zman ve'ein bo ela erechad, zeu suffix gerish. So let's see what Rashi says on these items, because these are important items. Zokt Rashi. Rashi says right over here, suffigation. Okay. I'm not looking for it. I'm looking a little bit later than that because I'm looking to the part of here. V'hachanami, like 2 lines above the Gemara in Rashi. V'hachanami chaletas tirasa, even the gitahu, since it is a good get, the amnesis have lot kosher, because if she did get married based on this get, it didn't have these items, the vlad will be kosher. We won't say that it's a mamzer that chooses an eshes. Even the lav gita al yehu, the kari lehu pasal lechatchila. So the Rabbanan didn't say she won't be mugareshes. Lechatchila, the Rabbanan said it's possible to use such a get. But if you use the get and then she got married to somebody else, we don't consider her to be an eshes. Hilchach isharisle, if we say she's mutter, amri inshi tsaras ha'erva misyabemis. Really, it's a good get. But the problem is we call it possible. So if we let this woman go l'shuk without chalitza, people are going to think that tsaras ervis mizabemis. So the next question is, why did we need a separate case to describe what's considered a suffix gerushin? Why didn't we use the same case as the suffix kedushin, where he threw her a get and it landed exactly in between them? Suffix karav lo, suffix karav lo. That was a perfect example of a suffix. Why did we need a separate set of sveikas? And not only that, the Mishnah says zeu suffix gerushin. Only these things are suffix gerushin, which would indicate that the example in the Reisha of the Mishnah referring to kedushin would not be considered the suffix gerushin. So that just makes the kasha a little bit more prominent. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. The ilu begerushin suffix karav loy katan. The Mishnah did not mention that as being an option. So obviously that's not an option. So obviously in a case where it was suffix karav loy, we will assume that it's not a good get. And if we assume that it's not a good get, this woman is free and clear. She doesn't need yivam, she doesn't need chalitza, she just walks. And she can marry anybody she wants. My timer, why can't she just walk and marry anyone she wants? Amarava, Zokt Rava, I'll tell you why. Because Ishizu, Becheskas Heter L'Shuk Oimedes. This woman has a co-wife at this point in time. The co-wife is Reuben's daughter, is an erva to Reuben. So therefore, under those conditions, the way the status quo was, she could marry anybody. In the event that her husband will die without children, she's not tied to anybody. She can marry any man because there's no dinibum there. Now a suffix was noiled because there's a suffix if this woman, the erva, was megureshes. Umi suffix atabala oisva. Because a suffix, maybe her co-wife was divorced. Because of that, now you want to say she can't marry anyone she wants. She needs chalitza. The Chazaka tells you al ta'asrena mi suffix. Because of a doubt that maybe her co-wife got divorced, you want to break her heter l'shuk. No, we're not going to let you do that. The Chazaka will protect her. So we now encountered something called chazaka. Chazaka is that when there's a certain status quo, we say that the status quo didn't change until we know for sure that it did change. So since there's only a suffix if her status quo changed, she retains her chazaka that in the event that her husband dies, she could marry anybody she wants.
Only is that suffix taken away, not a regular suffix. You said only with the suffix or less than less. What about the suffix of the other cases?
Oh, because those were cases where it's not really a suffix; it's a get psula. That's what Rashi says. It's not really a suffix if it's a good get, if it's not a good get. The Rabbanan said don't use such a type of get. Therefore, we're afraid that if she did use that type of get, we'll look at it like it's a possible get because everyone knows you can't do such a get, and everyone knows it was a possible get, even though it was a real get. So people are going to think that even though it was a possible get, people are going to think that she could do Yibam anyway. and even though she's a Taurus Erva. So that's why Tosha says Vidavka, it's takanara suffix over there. It's just it's since people call that get puzzle, because of that, you need to do chalitza. Well, that's exactly what the Gemara is saying here. Here, it's a real suffix. In fact, the Chazaka says that she remains married. That the Erva remains married, so she goes l'shuk. That's just at this step of the Gemara. Don't get settled in yet. Okay, so the Gemara, Omer le Abaye. So why don't you say the same thing with the suffix kedushin? Before she married, before her husband married the Erva, she also had a chazaka. Amar le Abaye ihachi bekedushinami. Nema ishazu becheskes heter liyabe my bedis. She also had a chazaka. When she was the only wife of Shimon, she had a chazaka that if Shimon would die, Reuben would do yibam on her, right? Umisavik at the bala Yisrael. And you want to say misavik, maybe Shimon married Reuben's daughter, and because of that suffix, you want to say that even the other wife, Rivka, cannot do yibam. Let's say the same chazaka, al tasra misavik. Let's say by kedushin you shouldn't answer her and let her do yibam. Because of her chazaka, that she was the only wife of Shimon, let her do yibam with Reuben after Shimon dies, even though there's a suffix if Shimon married Reuben's daughter. Zok to Gemara, so let her do the yibam. Zok to Gemara, hasam l'chumra. Really, be'etzem, we could let her do yibam. We can let her do yibam. Me'ikar adin she does have a chazaka. And me'ikar adin, the suffix kedushin does not break the chazaka. And me'ikar adin, Reuben could do yibam on Shimon's other wife, on Rivka. But we're machmer. We create a chumrah and we'll say let him do chalitza. Let's not let him do yibam. Let's let him do chalitza. Frank the Gemara, that's a chumrah. High chumrah, the asal de kulam. This is a chumrah that could lead to great problems. It's a very bad chumrah to undertake. You know why? Because based on this chumrah, from the fact that you're not letting him do yibam, you're basically paskening that this kedushin was a good kedushin, right? The chumrah is acting as if the kedushin was a good kedushin, and therefore you can't do yibam. If you're going to act as if this kedushin is a good kedushin, you're going to create a disaster. Why? Zimnin the azal hu umekadosh law la chaysa kedusha right? What if Shimon himself went to a different sister? Reuben had two brothers. Reuben might have had two daughters, or maybe a sister through a mother. So Shimon could go make a kedusha vadai on another sister. We know it's 100% a good kedushin. Now the question is, if the first sister's kedushin was a good kedushin, then the second sister's kedushin would not have been typhus at all, because you cannot marry two sisters. But since everybody thinks here that the kedushin is a good kedushin, so they're going to think the second sister is not married. Yeah, people are going to think. Because people say, hey, we're acting, Chazal here, the Rabbanim are acting as if she's married. The Gemara is going to bring that up in a second. The Gemara thought of that too. So Zok Gemara, V'inami, Zimnin da Osa Acher Mekadosh Lo L'Didah, Kedusha Bavik. But never mind Shimon. What if some stranger comes and makes Kedushin on this same woman that we're considering has been married to Shimon? V'chivin da Osa Lomar L'Tzara Liyabume. From the fact that you're saying that her Torah cannot do yibam, it means you're treating it l'chumra as if Shimon is married to Reuben's daughter. So what are people going to say? Amri dekama kedushin. Everyone's going to say that this first kedushin, that suffix kedushin that Shimon made on Reuben's daughter is a good kedushin. Ude basra on the second kedushin, either the one that Shimon did on a different sister or the one that some stranger did on this same woman, lav kedushin. And therefore, you're not going to require a get from that second person to make kedushin, which will be a disaster. So it's a chumra d'asel dekula. How could we? If you're going to tell me that me'ikar din, we look at her like she's not mekudeshes. And me'ikar din, she could do yibum to Reuben, and it's only because of a chumra we told Reuben not to do yibum, rather to do chalitza. Well, that's going to really mess things up, because then people are going to think that the kedushin was a good kedushin, and it'll create much bigger problems. And for the Gemara, exactly what these tiny. We're not letting her walk free. Even the kamatrach chalitza, since we're forcing her to get a chalitza from Reuben, made the yadi the chumra ba'alma. Everyone will know that it's just a chumra. It won't lead to a problem. No one's going to think that Shimon's really married to the second wife, who was only a suffix kedushin. Because if Shimon was really married to the second wife, we wouldn't need chalitza. from the fact that you need chalitza here, it shows that it's only a chumrah ba'alma that we consider Shimon married to Reuben's daughter, and therefore we don't need to worry that if somebody else makes kedushin on this woman, that it will be ignored. It won't be ignored. That was your kasha, right? Correct, Gemara. But if you're going to build a situation where you could make these gzeres and have all the safeguards to cover all your bases, well, then let's go back to Gershon. Yachi Gershon Ami. What about Gershon? List me. Let it list off the case of Safek Karav Loy, Safek Karav Law, and let's be machmer. Me'ikar adin, we say she's not megureshes, and this lady is mutar l'shuk, right? But let's be machmer that she is megureshes, and therefore there's a chiyuv yibum, but don't let her do the yibum, let her do the chalitza, the literal chalitza. You're going to say, people are going to think that if there's a chalitza, it must be that the get was a good get. No, umei the yadi the chumra ba'almahu. Everybody will know that the whole thing is only a chumra. Everybody will know it's not a good get. We're being machmer that it is a good get, and that's why we're requiring chalitza. So we're right back to square one. If you could create a chumra, if you really make it, you go basa chazaka. And by kedushin, there's only a special chumra not to allow her to get married, not to marry the oven, but to require chalitza. Let's do exactly the same thing with the suffix of get. Let's say it was a suffix get. Me'ikar din, we consider her not megureshes, and therefore she's allowed to marry any man. She doesn't need even more chalitza. And we're being machmer to require chalitza just in case the get was a good get. So we're back to square one. Why did the Mishnah not want to use a case of Safek Karav Law? Safek Karav Law is an example of a suffix get. Zok to Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because imata omer chayletzes misyabemes. We're afraid that if you're mechayev a woman to do chalitza, so people might think, okay, if we're doing chalitza on her, vice the chay, she's a regular Yevama. If that's the case, let her do yibum. So what's going to happen if she does yibum? There'll be a massive problem because we know me'ikar adin, she's divorced. Me'ikar adin, she's not divorced. The Arab is not divorced. If me'ikar adin, the Arab is not divorced, then this woman did not fall to yibum. If she does yibum, that's mamish being pageya be'eshes ach in a chiyuv chorus. So therefore, we don't want to even let her do chalitza because people will mistakenly do yibum. Correct the Gemara. I'm sorry. The Gemara is Bible with that. Correct the Gemara. Ask better kedushin itself. So why aren't we worried in the case of a safek kedushin? If you require chalitza, maybe she'll do yibum. Zok to Gemara, vitis yabim. Let her do yibum. What's a great deal? She does yibum. If the woman does the yibum with the safek kedushin, it's not a problem. Because really, me'ikar din, she was allowed to do yibum. Because me'ikar din, we say that the kedushin is not a kedushin. Why isn't there a problem? Okay, so the Gemara is going to go through different things, and we'll see if we can figure that out. So, for the Gemara, by kedushin, there's no problem if, because of the fact that we mandated a chalitza, she might do yibum. Because even if she does a yibum, the chazaka supports her doing the yibum. Because a chazaka kakaima, she has her good chazaka. So right now, at this stage in the Gemara says the reason why by kedushin we don't go basar chazaka and we're machmer and we do not let her make yibum. We force the chalitza is a chomer. It's a chomer ba'alma, and there's no danger that because of the chalitza she might also do yibum. Because if she does yibum, that's what the chazaka tells her to do. But on the flip side, by Gershon, if we would have been machmer and required chalitza for her, then she might do yibum. And the problem is the chazaka says that Shimon is still married to the erba, but the get's not a good get. And the chazaka says that yibum is also with a chiyuv kares. So therefore, we don't want to put her into such a situation. This is now going to the Wizard of Oz. Nafal habayis alav v'albas achit. There's a man who's married to two women. One of the women is a stranger, Rivka, and the other one happens to be Reuben's daughter. And he has no children. So when he dies, there's a question of evil. But he had two wives. One of his wives is an erba. One of his wives is Reuben's daughter. And the other one of his wives is a total stranger who ruins a lot of the yibam. But what happened was a house fell on him and on one of his wives. So the second wife, who's not related to anybody, survives. He dies, and this woman dies. But the Ein Yedua Eze Mehem Meis Rishon. We don't know who died first. And based on the shita of yesterday, based on that shita that holds that we only look at the situation when the Yibum was triggered, meaning when Shimon dies. So when Shimon died, was he still married to the Erba or not? If the Erba died before him in the house collapse, then when he died, he only had one wife, who would fall to Yibum, to Reuben. But if he died first, then when he died, he was married to an Erba as well. So Reuben would do Yibum. So now we don't know what to do with Rivka. Should we do Yibum on her or not? So the Allah is Sarasa, Rivka, his wife who survived, we don't let her do Yibum, we don't let her do Chalitza. Frag the Gemara, Amai, Hachanami, Nema Ishazu Becheskas Heter L'Shukai Medes. This woman was in the Chazaka that she's mutter l'shuk, because she was a co-wife. During their life, before this accident happened, Shimon was married both to Rivka and to Reuben's daughter. So that means Rivka knew that there would be no Chiyav Yibum because she's a Tsar Sa'erba. She has a Chazaka that she is mutter to marry anybody else. Umisavik Ata Bala Aisha. Because of the Savik that maybe the daughter of Reuben died before Shimon, because of that, you want to say that the Tsar now is falling to Yibum. Al Tasrana Misavik. Go bust the Chazaka and don't ask her Misavik. So according to the logic that the Gemara is saying, that when the chazaka is that a woman's mutter l'shuk, when the chazaka is that a woman's mutter l'shuk, we make sure that she's mutter l'shuk. Why over here don't we follow that chazaka? And if you want to argue that the fact that we required Reuben to do chalitza on Rivka is only a chumrah, but really Rivka, we can assume, is a Tzara Se'erva, and she can marry any woman she wants, any man she wants, and she doesn't need chalitza. But chumrah da'asher l'dei kulahu, we have the same problem. It's a chumrah that can come to a kula. Shim'at ha'omer chelet says, if we say Reuben has to do chalitza with Rivka, mishabemes, people will think that there's a real zika, and Reuben might end up doing yibum on Rivka, and he would be being pagei rachman l'tzlan in eishesach. Zog to Gemara, that's not a kasha. Gershon the Shchichi Gozri Rabban. When were the Rabban and Geyser imata cheletzes mishabemes, and because of that they backed off and they left it in its original place of chazaka and let this woman marry Lashuk without any chalitza? That's only by Gershon, because it's a common thing that people divorce their wives, and since it's a common thing that people divorce their wives, the Chachamim had to make sure that we don't have this problem of im cheletzes mishabemes. So therefore they backed off. But Mapoilas, the Lashchichi, how often does it happen that a guy who's married to his brother's daughter and another wife, think he should be in the house collapse? It's a very unusual situation to happen, and therefore, Loigazu b'Rabbanan. They're not worried of im chaylatzes mishabemes, so it's not Loigazu. They are gozer to aser and to require chalitza for Rivka. You know, we don't go bust the chazaka and say that Rivka can marry anybody because her husband was married to an Erva. No. Of a Zoivite, we are machmer, and we say that she requires chalitza, but we don't prevent ourselves from making that gzeira because we're afraid of im chayletzes mishabemes. We don't do that because it's too unusual of a case. Frag the Gemara, inami. That's one teretz. The reason why in that case they were geyser and they're not worried about im chayletzes mishabemes is because that's an unusual case and we're not worried about it. Inami, another fascinating answer. Gershon. The Kaima Erba. In the case of Gershon, what happens over here? Shimon divorced Reuben's daughter. But Reuben's daughter is standing right here. She's still alive. Nobody got collapsed under a house. This woman is still here. Inami Gershon, the Kaima Erba, the Kamuchach. She's here. So everybody sees this. Everyone sees this scenario. Everybody sees that there's an Erba here. And Vitzarasa Kamatrichas La Chalitza. If you would say that now her co-wife requires chalitza, so what are people going to say? How are people going to process what they're seeing? They're seeing that there's a tzara sa'erva here, and they're seeing that the tzara sa'erva doesn't need chalitza. So what are they going to say? Amr, they'll say, "Kamu be'Rabbanan begita." They know there was a suffix get over here, but they'll say the Rabbanan analyzed this scenario, and they paskin the gita ma'ayu. And they paskin that it'll do a get. The way people are going to process what they see here, there was a Safek Karav Law, and after that, the Rabbanan were Matrich Chalitza to Rivka. They'll say, oh, probably what happened was the Rabbanan, there was a Safek. The Rabbanan analyzed it. They passed it that it's a good get, and therefore she needs Chalitza. And therefore, since people are going to process it, that the Rabbanan passed it that it was a good get, so then they might allow Yibam as well. That would be disaster. But Mapoilas, mi kamu buhu Rabbanan b'Mapoilas, no one's going to say that the Rabbanan through Nevuah knew that the Erba died first. They know it's impossible for the Rabbanan to have ever come to a conclusion on what occurred. So they know it's a suffix. So there's no problem of im chaylatzes mishabemis. People aren't going to jump to conclusions because people are going to know that the Rabbanan are just being machmer, and there's no way they could have made a ruling, in fact, that the Erba died first. Zok the Gemara, B'Gabe Gershon, Milak Nan. Now the Gemara is asking a direct kasha on Gershon to prove that we are machmer. B'Gabe Gershon, Milak Nan, but now we look at Mishnah. Hoysa Oimedis B'Shus HaRabim. A woman was standing in Rishus HaRabim. V'Zar Koyla, and her husband threw the get to her. Karav law, if the get lands closer to her, again, this is once again when they're exactly 8 amos apart, and it lands closer to her within her 4 amos, migureshes. We consider it like she has possession of the get and she's migureshes. Karav loy, but if it's closer to him, aina migureshes, she would not be divorced. Mechza al mechza, if it was exactly half and half, migureshes v'aina migureshes. It's a suffix, and you don't go bust to chazaka and say that she's not migureshes. You say it's a suffix. What's the nafkamina if the woman is suffix migureshes or not? The halach is very simple. The nafkamina will be very simple. If she was married to a kohen who may not marry a grusha, the kohen who asur lay. If this was a kohen who threw the get, he would not even be able to remarry her because maybe she was migureshes, right? Because it's the suffix get. That's one place where it's relevant. The next place that it's relevant is exactly in our case. The ervahi, if this woman was the daughter of Reuven and was married to Shimon, and Shimon is married to a second wife, which is exactly our case, then Sarasa, boy chalitza, Rivka needs a chalitza because you have to be machmir, and maybe the get is a good get. So this is a direct stira. Our Mishnah we're claiming did not say the case of get because we would not say it needs chalitza in a suffix, and here in exactly the same suffix, karav law, suffix karav law, the Mishnah beferishes that you do make chalitza. So it's mamash stira. Your whole theory that by get you wouldn't need chalitza is blown out of the water. We have a mafurish brisa that says you do need chalitza, right? You had a whole time you don't need chalitza, and now we have a mafurish brisa that you do need chalitza. Zok the Gemara, there's a very big difference between this case and the case that our Mishnah would have been talking about. Let's just be very clear. Our Mishnah never says a case of chalitza. It's an imaginary case of chalitza that would have paralleled the case of kedushin that the Mishnah did say, right? Because the whole Gemara's kasha is, how come the Mishnah didn't also say by get something karav law? The Mishnah didn't say that. But the Gemara is asking that there's an imaginary case that the Mishnah should have said that would have paralleled the case of the kedushin. So Zok the Gemara, there's a very big difference. Because Itmar Allah, Rabbah is an important name. Itmar Allah, Rabbah, Rabbi Yosef, the Amritar value, Hacha Pishteki to Ide Maskina. The case in the Brisa where we are makbid and we do say that maybe the get was a good get and you don't follow the chazaka is when you have 2 sets of Edom. Achas Oimeres Karev law. 2 sets of Edom said the get is closer to her and she's Migureshes. The Achas Oimeres Karev law. And there's 2 Edom who say that the get is not a good get. It's a subject diraisa. And Rashi says, Kivan the Trey Amri Karev law, since there's 2 Edom that say that the get is a good get, you cannot follow the chazaka of the tzara. So since this suffix is a suffix where 2 Edom are claiming that the get is a good get, then we can't follow the chazaka and let her tzara walk without any type of chalitza. And that's why in the Bryce's case we needed chalitza. Umasnisin the hacha, but our Mishnah, the suffix karav law that our Mishnah is discussing about kedushin, which we want the Mishnah to include in Gershon, is bekat achas. There's only one set of Edom that was sveika derabban. When there's only one set of Edom, it's a suffix derabbanan. Now the question is, what does it mean, one set of Edom? Zokt Rashi, Rashi says, Eid Omer Karav Loi, the Eid Omer Karav Law. It's one Eid saying Karav Loi, and one Eid that says Karav Law. Hilchach, therefore, the Kedushin, who'd Ikal Messiah, will only mention Shat Safik by Kedushin, Mishum the Becheskas Heter Liyebom Kaima. This woman had a Heter to Yibom because we're assuming that she's the only wife of Shimon. Mishum Eid Echad Amar Karav Law, but since there's one Eid that's saying that Shimon married Reuben's daughter, we will not remove this woman from her chazaka, and we will say that she can still do Yibam with Reuben, but we don't let her do Yibam, we only make her do Chalitza. But if you had a parallel case of Gershon, Lekel Misanya, you wouldn't be able to say this case. We consider that Shimon was still married to both women, and she has a chazaka, this tzara, that she's the tzaras erba, and she can marry anybody. Eid Echad Amar Karav Law, and this Eid Echad that says Karav Law, and that her tzara is no longer married to Shimon, boy lafuke mechazak. That's trying to take her out of the chazaka, which says that she doesn't need to do yibum, she's mutter to any man. The chivin the leka edus shalem, since there's no complete edus, as lidl lekula, you go lekula, become a communion achazaka. And therefore, boy chalitza, you don't need chalitza, shemat aimer chalatzes meshem. So that's what the Gemara wants to say. When there's only one aid going against the chazaka, then you'll follow the chazaka. Correct the Gemara. How do you know that that's the case of the Mishnah? Our Mishnah says by kedushin sofek karav law. You're making up that it's one aid, maybe it's two aid in each way. How do you know that our Mishnah is speaking where there's only one set of aidim and one says one way and one says the other way? How do you know that that's the proposed case of Gershon? Well, it's domi to kedushin. It would be similar to the case in kedushin that our Mishnah says. Ma kedushin. Just like the case of kedushin, we know is bekat achas. Av Gershon is bekat achas. How do you know the kedushin is bekat achas? The kedushin gefayu mimai de bekat achas. How do you know that's the case in our Mishnah? Sofek karav law. There's only one aid in each direction. Maybe there's two aid in each direction. Dilma bebeis kite aid. I'll tell you how I know. The way I know that in our Mishnah there has to be only one aid in each direction and not two edim in each direction is because even base kitei edim, if in fact there would be two sets of edim, we would say tis yabem. We would let her do yibam. We would let her do yibam because we have two edim that are saying that she's that the kedushin to the erba was not a good kedushin. She has a chazaka, and she has a chazaka that she could make yibam because there's no other co-wife. And we have two Edom that says that she's not that the kedushin was not a good kedushin. Frank Gemara, how could you say that? The Gemara really asks this question. I don't understand. Kaimi Edom, we have two Edom here. The Ka'amri Karav Law. We have two Edom that clearly say that it was a good kedushin. And you're going to suggest she should make yibam? But Frank Gemara, but there's still two Edom. How could you do that? It's still a suffix rice. The Gemara is coming back. I think it's still a suffix rice. Zok to Gemara. You say you should do yibam. How could we let a woman do yibam when there's two edim that's saying that she's literally being pagei by eishes ach shaloi b'machmas? Correct. There's one set of edim, one that says karav loy and one that says karav loy. So that's a very good kasha. How could you say it's just one set of edim and one says karav loy and one says karav law? That's nothing. So there's another pshat, and also you should put one aid against another aid and go basar chazak. So there's other Rishonim will learn that kadachas means that the edim themselves aren't sure. Both edim are united, and they're not sure. So that's why there's a something. And let's look at Gershon itself. You wanted to say that the case that we just quoted, where it's a sofek karav law, she's sofek migoreshes and requires chalitza. We're speaking when there's two edim who said karav loy and two edim who said karav law. Don't say it's a sofek daraisa, and that's why you could do chalitza, and you're not worried about a marriage chalitzas mishabemes, because the armory uki trailer bahadi trade. Even when there's two sets of edim, have one set of edim neutralized the other set of edim. The isha ukma achazaka. and the woman should be on her chazaka, meaning we should say she's not megareshes. And if she's not megareshes, then her tzara walks free. Why do you say her tzara needs chalitza? So we're stuck now. And I'll prove it to you that when you have two conflicting set of edim, you ignore both sets of edim and you go bust the chazaka. Midi de hava nichse de bashat. This is I could prove to you that when there's two conflicting edim in the chazaka, you ignore the edim and you just focus on the chazaka. You know it from the story of Bashatya. Bashatya was a guy who sometimes he was lucid and sometimes he was not. And the Bashatya Zavin Nechsi, he sold the field. Also betrayed, two edim came along. Army Kishu Cholim Zavin, he sold it when he was astute, when he was lucid, he was clear. So it's a good mechir. But betrayed Army Kishu Shaita Zavin. No, when he sold, he was not clear. So therefore, it's not a good mechir. So the question is it a good mechir or not? One Rabashi said, Uki trey, lahadi trey. You could cancel the two sets of edim out. The ara, ukma, vecheskes barshatya. And the land will remain in the chazaka of barshatya. And we look at it like it's not sold. So too in our case with the get. You have two edim that say it's a good get. You have two edim that say it's not a good get. The chazaka tells us that it's not a good get, and therefore let's say that this woman should not require chalitza. So because of that, we're abandoning everything. Up until now, we wanted to say that the Safek Karav Law was only an example of Safek Kedushin, but that wouldn't be an example of Safek Gerushin because we would go Basar Chazaka. We wouldn't say chalitzas. Now Abai is backing up and says, no, in fact, Safek Gerushin is the same thing as Safek Kedushin. The reason why he didn't say this case of Safek Gerushin is because we figured it out. If in the Safek Kedushin you would have this chumrah, automatically you would have the same halach with Gerushin, and the mission didn't speak it out. Alamar Abaye Yagid Olav Reyai. His buddy is going to clarify what he meant. In other words, Tana Kedushin, the example of a Safek Karvlo was used to describe a Safek Kedushin, but the Hudin Gerushin. Of course, if you had a Safek Gerushin, it would be the same thing. And Tana Gerushin. And the same thing, all of the cases that were mentioned as Sveikus by Gerushin would also equally be applicable to Kedushin. Amalei Rava said, I know it's 650, but remember, it's the middle of a line. Amalei Rava, if that's what it means, then we have a problem. And as if you're going to say whatever was said by Kedushin applies to Gerushin and vice versa, well then ma zehu de katani. By Kedushin it says zehu, this is Safek Kedushin, but all the other cases mentioned by Gerushin are not good examples of a Safek Kedushin. Or zehu Safek Gerushin, these cases are the Safek Gerushin where there was no Zman in the get. But anything else, such as Safek Karabla, would not be good examples. But so how could you say that what applies to one applies to the other? My zehu de katani. Amar Rava, I'm going to modify what I said. Kol sheyesh b'kedushin yesh b'gerushin. Any of the sveikas by kedushin like Safek Karabla would also apply to gerushin. However, v'yesh b'gerushin mashem b'kedushin. But the sveikas that are mentioned in the mission that apply to gerushin do not apply to kedushin. V'zeu de gerushin lav davke. And when it says after the Mishnah lists off what the Safek Gerushins are, just zeu Safek Gerushin, it doesn't really mean to say that a Safek Karabla would not be a good gerushin. It's lav davke. Elamishim, the Tana Zeu B'Kedushin, since it said it by Kedushin, and by Kedushin it was dafke, that only the case mentioned in the Mishnah is Safek Kedushin, but not others, it used the same Lashon in the Sefer by Gerushin, but it doesn't really mean it. Tananami, Zeu B'Gerushin, the Zeu de Kedushin Lamutimai. So the Zeu de Kedushin, the Mishnah lists off that a Safek Kedushin is Safek Karabla. This is the only example of Safek Kedushin. What other examples might I mistakenly think is also a Safek Kedushin that the Mishnah is trying to tell us those are not Safek Kedushins? The leka b'kedushin. Dates. You don't have to put a date in a Kedushin. In other words, the Kedushin does not have to have the date in it. Okay, let's stop here because it's 6:52, even though we're mamish in the middle of something, but it is 6:52. So we'll stop. We should really be able to get to the Mishnah. Or you can give me 3 minutes. I'll get to the Mishnah in 3 minutes. It's very easy. Why don't we put a date in Kedushin? I understand if it's because of Peri. Now, there is a Zman by get. Why is there a Zman by get? Because we have to know at what point the husband can no longer eat Paris from the woman's Nechasim. From the date of the get, he no longer has the right to eat from her Nechsim Look. But Arusa Lesla Peri. So therefore, on the Star Kedushin, you shouldn't need a date for that. Because anyway, when you make kedushin to a woman, you can't eat the perish for nixam malug. You're not entitled to the nesuin. So if anything, the nesuin needs a day, but the kedushin doesn't need a day. Why is there Why is there a date by a get? To avoid him saying that when she was mezana, she was already divorced, like we said earlier. Let's say his wife is also his niece, and she's mezana, he'll lie and say that she was really divorced before this nus. So, Frank Gemara, if that's the case, list man. So for kedushin, you need this man as well, because otherwise he'll say, "Oh, she was mezana, but that was before I married her." So Gemara, mishum deikid mekalish bekaspa, deikid mekalish b'shtora, loy tikkun rabbanan man. Since not everybody uses by get, everybody has to use a star. But by kedushin, some people use kesef, and since some people use kesef, therefore we don't bother with zman. Amalei Ravacha b'Rei Rabbi Yosef b'Rabashi b'Aiva Avda deikid dekadi bekaspa. By avodim, there you could buy an evid with a star, and you could buy it with kesef as well, and deikid b'shtara, and still b'tikkun rabbanan man. So Gemara, of course, but hasam rubu b'shtara. The normal way to buy an evid is using a star. So therefore, they put his man in the star because that's the norm. But the normal way to marry a woman is with kinyan kesef, with kedusha kesef, not with the star. So for the couple of oddballs that use a star, we're not going to put his man. Even if you put the date in the star kedushin, it wouldn't help you. Hey Chalabi, what should you do with the star kedushin? You give it to her, she'll erase it, she'll eliminate it, because she's trying to save her life. She was mazana, so she's not going to produce it. If you give it to the husband, well, once again, if it's a case of basach he's not either going to pull that star kedushin to save her. So what are you going to suggest? Lincha gabe edim, give it to edim, and they'll pull it out. If they knew when in fact the marriage occurred, let them come say testimony. And if they don't know when, they can't read it off a star. That's called hearsay. The chazu michtava of asu misade rachman amar mi pm v'lo mi piksavam. Testimony has to be edim is saying edim. It can't just be written testimony. If that's the case, ihachi begershin nami nema hachi. By gershin say the same thing. What purpose is there to put the get? She'll hide it. So tomorrow it's a very big difference. Hasam latzala lidakasi. She's not going to hide the gershin. The gershin is what's going to save her life. She has to prove that she was mugareshes. So therefore, there's a very big value to putting the get in the star, in the date in the get. So when she pulls the get, we'll know when the get occurred. But the kedushin, there's no benefit for her to pull it out. If she doesn't pull it out, then no one can prove that she was ever married. Okay, we will stop here. We did most of the block.